All right, I know we all had a pretty good lunch, at least I did, and I am feeling a bit sleepy, so let's get started with some activity. So Gio has been doing a wonderful job emceeing, so I want you all to give a huge round of applause for him. Can we do that? Wonderful. And I need more energy, because organizing conferences is not that easy. So let's give it up for the organizers as well. Perfect. All right. Now I feel like there is some energy back in the room, so I'm going to continue with my talk, which is controlling the web with a PS5 controller. Before I jump into the talk, there are a couple of things, and my clickers decided not to work. No worries. All right. So everything that I'm going to be sharing today is already available. You can find my slides, all the resources, and everything on this particular link. I'm going to share it later on at the end of the talk as well, so don't worry if you miss out on this. Moving forward, there are 3 important things that I need to tell you before I jump into it. The first thing, I am not a gamer. So if you have any questions around any kind of PS5 games or any games, I'm not the best person for it. And the second thing is kind of ironic, because I got a PS5 at a flash sale. Don't ask me how much I paid for it. I kind of regret paying that much, but that's a different story. And no ChatGPT was used in building of any of the demos or the presentations at all. All right, so who am I? My name is Harshil Agrawal, and I work as a developer advocate at Contentful. For the folks who don't know Contentful, it's a composable content platform with an API-first architecture. Using Contentful, you can orchestrate content from multiple sources, manage your content, and publish it on any digital platform. But apart from that, I like to think about myself as an experimentalist, because I do a lot of crazy experiments, try out a lot of things, and then share this learning with the community, just what I'm doing today. And lastly, I have been trying to learn to get better at digital illustrations. So all these drawings that you would be seeing throughout my talk are my own work. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. But if you want to talk about that, I am happy to chat about that as well. All right, moving forward, the agenda of this talk looks something like this. We're going to start with the introduction. We're going to then move to a demo. And with the demo, I'm going to also look into the implementation. And if the live coding gods are kind enough on me today, I will be able to successfully live code a few things around what I'm going to talk today. All right. So moving forward, how many of you know what an API is? Can I get a show of hands? Oh my God, I wasn't expecting that response. That's wonderful. So most of you know what an API is, but for the folks who are hearing this for the first time, API stands for Application Programming Interface. And I'm going to try to summarize it in a few words. It basically allows 2 systems to communicate with each other. And web APIs are basically APIs for the web. Now, these allows servers to communicate with other servers, servers to communicate with client, client to communicate with client, and all those things. And these web APIs can be categorized into 2. The first is a third-party API. So these are basically external APIs that you would be using to interact with web servers. And these APIs, because they are an external API, they are not built in the browser. So for example, the YouTube API, the Telegram API, and then the APIs that Contentful provides as well. The other part is the browser API. And as the name suggests, these APIs are built in the browser. Because they are built in the browser, they allow you to extend the capabilities of the browser. And a couple of examples are the Web Audio API. Using the Web Audio API, you can basically interact with the audio that is available in your web application. Then there is the Gamepad API and the WebHID API. These 2 I am going to cover in this talk today. So let's talk about the Gamepad API. So the Gamepad API has been in existence for a while. Almost all the browsers support this API. But there are a couple of limitations, which I will be covering in some time. But before that, let's move into a very small demo. So I've created a small game which is completely incomplete. So what it does is basically I can control the motion of Mario over here with my controller. Now, as you can see, I am interacting with the game using my PS5 controller, and this is using the Gamepad API. Okay. I had a very cool animation for a laser, but it's not working right now. Never mind. So I'm gonna jump into the next slide, and then we're also gonna look into the implementation. So the first thing you want to do whenever you are using the Gamepad API is simply connect the device with your application, and that's it. Whenever the user interacts with the controller for the first time, the API automatically detects the controller, and then you can start interacting with that. So the Gamepad API also gives you like a gamepad interface, which contains the axis, now buttons, and these two may change based on what kind of controller you have connected. But then there is another flag that says connected. Then there is the other information of the controller, like the ID, the mapping, the timestamp, and all this information. So this is already provided by the API itself. Now there are two events that you want to use when you are using the Gamepad API. The first is to check if a controller is connected, and for that you use the Gamepad connected event. So whenever a Gamepad is connected, this event would get triggered, and then based on what you want to do, you can perform that particular logic. Now because there is a connect event, there is a disconnect event, and this would get triggered whenever the control is disconnected from your application. The next is, with this API, you can connect multiple devices, and you might want to get or filter out devices. So you can get these devices using the get gamepad function, and this is the part of the Navigator API. I'm gonna stop talking over here and show you the code that I have in here. Is this good enough for everyone? Can everyone see the screen? Can everyone read the code? Or should I zoom in a bit? All right. I hope this is good enough for everyone. Perfect. So as I mentioned, the first thing you want to do is you want to check if the gamepad is connected or not. So that is what I'm doing on line 83 over here. If the gamepad is connected, I do some logic in here, and I basically run a function called pull gamepad every 300 milliseconds. And this function is basically calling another function that's called game loop, which would be again running every 300 milliseconds. And then that game loop function will be passing on the axis and the button to my axis control and the button control functions respectively, because that's where I am handling the logic of the movement of Mario and everything else. Now if you see over here, with this particular API, I need to have a set interval. I need to run this function for every particular interval of time. And that is why we don't have a smooth experience in here. So if you see, it looks very chunky, it does not look so good. And I'll be honest, I'm also not so good with CSS, so it's also a bit of my CSS skills over here. But that is something that I kind of didn't like when I started experimenting, when I started playing with the Gamepad API, is that it does not have a real-time approach to your games. All right, so talking about the limitations, as I already mentioned, it does not give your users a real-time feeling of the game. You will have to set up logic in there to make it feel like it's a real-time game, even though it's not. The other thing is, with the Gamepad API, you cannot provide an output to the user in terms of haptic feedback. And not just haptic feedback, you cannot even change the LED colors which are on my controller over here. So these are like two of the major limitations that I came across the Gamepad API, which the WebHID API does not have. However, the WebHID API is still under experimental state, so not all the browsers support this, and there is a good reason for that. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, but let's try to understand what HID exactly is. So HID stands for Human Interface Devices, and these devices are basically bidirectional communication device. By that, it means that you can send an input to your application via the device, and you can also get an output on the device via your application. So remember the limitation that the Gamepad API had of no haptic feedback. that you can overcome with the WebHID API, because now you can provide that haptic feedback to the user. Let's move forward. Now with this, let's jump into the demo for this real quick. Now this is the same game that I have created, but now because I'm using the WebHID API, there is one layer more. So I need to click on connect. I need to allow my browser to connect to that device, and then the game loads. Now that the game is over here, I can move the character back and forth and up and down, and you see it's pretty smooth, much better than what we had in the Gamepad example. And we got the laser working over here as well. There was sound, but anyways. So this is an implementation of the same game using the the WebHID API. Now let's look at the functions, the events that the API provides, and then we'll look into the code of that game. So the first thing, as I mentioned, you need to explicitly ask the user to connect that device, and you use the request device function for that. And with that, you pass on a filter parameter where you specify the vendor ID and the product ID. Now, each vendor ID and product ID are different, and I found it a bit difficult to find that information, so I've added the link from where you can find that information as well. So if you are using the WebHID API, and if you're not sure what the vendor ID or the product ID is, you can find it on that link. Now, similar to filters, there is another parameter called exclusion filters. What this filter does is basically lets you create a list of controllers that you don't want your application to get connected with. Even though that controller is connected to your machine, it will not be shown on the pop-up whenever the user gets that connection, the connect pop-up. Now, similar to the Gamepad API, we have a function that gives us all the list of connected devices. Now, again, this is going to be just the devices that the user has given the permission to get connected. And over here, we use the getDevices function. Right. I'm going to try to live code the things that I have just talked about and hope that it would work. So over here, I have a very small application. If I click on connect, nothing happens. We get an error in the console because things aren't configured yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing I want to do is connect the device, and I'm going to use navigator.id and then request device function. I already have my filter in here, so I'm just going to copy paste that. Save this, and if I connect, we get the pop-up, we get the device, and I can connect in here, and I get some output down here. Similarly, I can implement the getDevices function as well, so let's try to do that. Now, if you see, by default, this API is an asynchronous API, which I kind of really like because I don't have to worry a lot about the promises and all that things going on in there. Get devices. Hope this works. And we got the device information over here as well. Now, if you see over here, we get, similar to the Gamepad API, we get an HID interface over here. So let's talk a bit about that. So the HID interface contains the collection, which is basically the collection of the reports. Then there is an onInput report function. Now this function gets triggered every time you interact with the controller. There is an open flag. Even though the controller is connected to the application, by default, the flag is going to be false, which means that the exchange of data is not going to take place. You will have to run a function to open this particular connection. And then there is the product ID, the product name, and the vendor ID. All right. Now, as I mentioned, by default, the connection is always closed, even though you have connected the device. You can use the device.open function to connect, to open the connection between your application and the device. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, I have a function over here, which I am calling whenever the device is connected. So I'm going to do device.open, save this, and I'm going to connect it again. And now if you can hopefully see the open flag turn to true, which means that I can now start interacting with my controller. My application will start receiving the information, and I can also send back the information to my controller as well. Now moving forward, the data in the WebHID space is a bit tricky because all this data is in the binary format, which makes it really, really interesting to work with, especially because there are no proper data sheets available for all the controllers out there. But data in general in the WebHID space is called as report. And there are 3 types of reports. The first is the input report. This is basically the binary data that is going in from the controller to your web application. The next is the output report, which is basically the binary data that you send from your application to the controller. And the third is the feature report, which can be the binary data that you send and receive to your controller as well. And to listen to this input, you can use the input report event listener, or the other way that I like to do is use the onInput report function. So I'm going to try to implement this in the code, and hopefully we should be able to run this pretty smooth. So over here, I have the open connection. Now what I want to do is device.input report, and this is again going to be async. And I'm going to extract out 3 information, which is going to be the data, that is again the binary data, the device information, and the report ID. Now each and every report that is being sent or received has a report ID, but if it does not have a report ID, that means it generally is using 0 as the report ID over here. Let's log this information. Let's log just the data over here. I'm going to save this. I'm going to connect the device again. And now we see that we got a stream of logs coming in over here, which is of the type data view. And if I click on this, you can see it's not so good looking binary information. All right. We looked into how we can receive input coming in from the device. Let's look into how we can send information to the device. And we do that using the send report function. But with this function, you need to specify a report ID as well as the data. Now remember, I told you working with data in here is very tricky, and I'm going to show you why it is. So over here, I have already configured the data. I have the report ID. And what I want to do is I want to rumble or basically vibrate my controller. At the same time, I also want to change the color of the LED in here. And for that, I had to do tons and tons of trial and errors to come to this particular format. And I'm not sure if you folks can see, but right now it's orange red color for the LED in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to change that color to blue, because the last 3 bits that you see over here represent RGB. That's red, green, and blue. And I have set it to blue right now so that the color changes to blue. All right, and my report is the report ID is in the first index, and then I'm going to do report.slice and then send the rest of the data. And I'm going to try to connect the device again. I'm going to assume things are working fine. I'm going to click on change color. And all right, okay, so it got connected to my phone, which is pretty bad. But now you can see that the color has changed and it's now blue. Let's try to change it to green so that I didn't cheat over there and I wasn't joking or kidding around over here. So I'm going to change this over here, save this. Just going to do a quick refresh, connect, click on change color. Okay, so you can see now the color is changed and now it's green in color. So with the WebHID API, you can send the output to the user and make your applications more interactive, more fun. I could not get the opportunity to implement the feature report, But if you want to try out feature report, it's similar. You use the send feature report function. You pass on the report ID, and then you pass on the data as well. And the next is, if you want to receive a feature report, you use the receive feature report function. But over here, you have to specify the report ID because a feature report can be of multiple types, and you want to make sure that you get a proper ID or what you want to basically receive from the controller. All right. Similar to the Gamepad API, we have the connect event handler. So whenever a device gets connected, or basically whenever the user allows you to connect the controller to the application, this event gets triggered, and then based on the logic that you have, you can move ahead with your application. For example, in the Mario game, when the user clicked on connect, and the controller got connected, that's when the game got loaded on the screen. So you can use the connect event listener like that, and there is another event listener that's called disconnect, similar to what we had in the Gamepad API. If the controller gets disconnected, this will get triggered, and you might want to show up an error to the user like, hey, the device is disconnected, you might want to reconnect it again, or whatever you want to do with that logic. Now, because we have an open connection function, there is a need to have a close connection function, because oftentimes the game is over and you don't want that connection to be open. You want to make sure that the connection is closed so that no exchange of information is happening. And for that, you use the close function over here. But this again would just close the connection. The device will still be connected. If you want to disconnect the device completely, that's when you use the forget function. This will close the connection, and this will also disconnect that device. So the user would now again have to go through the connections tab, click on the connect button, connect that application. You'll have the open function running to open up the connection, and then they can access or play with the game. As I mentioned earlier, not all the browsers support the WebHID API. Right now, it's just browsers based on the Chromium engine and Opera, surprisingly. And there is, as I mentioned earlier, a good reason why not all the browsers support this, and that is because of security. The way this API is structured, it becomes easy for bad actors to do a lot of things. For example, to get your private information. Right now, it's a game controller. It does not have my private information. So in a way, I am safe. But HID devices come in a lot of different shapes and types. Some of them might contain your private information. So a bad actor can easily, if you allow them to connect to that application, they can easily then get access to your private information. And that's similar for sensors as well. If you have smart sensors at home, which are HID compliant, you might want to think about this before you start giving access to any random application out there. The other part is, it is easy for anyone to harm the device because, again, the data that you send is basically binary data. So with the right combination, you can send out harmful information to the device and destroy the device as well. And it's the same the other way around. You can harm the host, so you can harm the machine that is being connected to that particular device. So these are some of the major security issues with the WebHID API currently. Hopefully we'll get a solution for that. People are working on it, but that's the state of this right now. So if you are really curious about using WebHID in any of your production applications, be sure to make sure that you are following the best practices and you know what are the security flaws with this. All right, with this, I'm going to do a last demo because this is my favorite demo. This is a snake game, which apparently I did not build from scratch. I forked a repo from GitHub, and I just implemented the WebHID API over here. The last time I played this game on the stage, I was really, really bad. I could not score like one as well. So I'm going to try and hopefully be able to score. Okay, I did score more than one. Anyways, the game's ended, but the fun part is I implemented the rumbling as well as the changing of the LED. Because the game ended, the LED color is now red. So just a way to give feedback to the user. I'm going to quickly walk through the code of this. Now again, I did not code the whole game from scratch. I just implemented the HID part of it. So I'm going to talk about that. Okay, let me quickly find that. Okay. So the first thing is whenever the game starts, I'm checking if the device is already connected or not. If it is connected, I'm opening up the connection over here so that the exchange of information can take place. If not, I am basically requesting for the connection. I'm then connecting the device and then opening up. If things don't go as planned, I'm simply throwing out an error. Now what I'm doing is I have a controller output, which will look in a bit. But over here, I have the onInput report function, which basically gets triggered every time I interact with my controller. And I am getting out the report ID and the data. I'm checking if the report ID is correct. If it is correct, I'm normalizing the data because, again, the data is in binary format. I don't know how to read binary. The computer does, but not me. So for me to make sense, I'm normalizing it so that I know what is happening in there, and I'm passing on that to the other functions, which would then take care of how the snake moves. And I'm also doing the same thing with the button. Oh, I haven't implemented button, so we can skip that. And over here is the controller output. So if I scroll down somewhere at the bottom over here, this is where I have configured already the information, so the report ID, the data that I want to send, and then I'm basically sending that using the send report function. So that was the small little demo that I wanted to show you all. Again, all those links are available on the previous slide that I showed you, and there are other examples out there that is created by the community. One of them is Ergometer Space. If you have an ergometer at home and you're not using that, I would highly recommend checking this out because it is a fun way to use ergometer and get back to working out and being fit. And then there is another one called Remap. If you are a keyboard enthusiast, Remap is a really cool project which uses WebHID under the hood to basically do those key bindings. I don't know if that's the correct term, but basically do remapping for those keys. And these are a couple of resources that have helped me learn about WebHID and create those demos that I have. Again, you can find all this information on this particular link. I'm going to leave it here for a couple of more seconds so that everyone get this information in here. And with this, I see folks taking picture. With this, thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed the talk and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference.
Right on, right on. Thank you so much, Harshil. I'm also going to invite you to answer some questions that these guys brought up to us. So, first question is from Gonçalo Marantes. What was the motivation to experiment with a Gamepad API?
That's a really good question. So I actually started working or experimenting with the WebHID API. And when I was working with the WebHID API, that's when I learned, all right, there is another API which I can use to, recreate these demos, which is more standard, which is available in almost all the browsers out there. But when I was implementing that, that's when I learned, okay, it's not as fun as it is with the WebHID API.
Okay, that's a good one. Thanks, man. Next question from Maps or MAPS. What's the future of this type of development using the PS5 controller, and can we expect haptic feedback?
Yes, so with WebHID, you can still already have the option to implement haptic feedback. As I mentioned, the data sheet right now is not available, so it's difficult to understand at which index you need to have that information to get that haptic feedback, but it is still possible. With the Gamepad API, they are trying to work on it. It's still not there yet. And one thing I wanted to add, but I did not add it in the slide, is all these companies like Microsoft, Sony, they are creating more accessible controllers, which I feel would be wonderful if we start implementing, WebHID on web pages because these controllers have been created with such wonderful thoughts, have been done. They have done a lot of research into creating these controllers. So keeping web accessibility in mind, I feel like it would make the web more accessible for a lot of folks.
Awesome, awesome. Next question. Where can we find the documentation for report data? Or does each controller manufacturer have its own byte stream specification? This question also from Gonzalo.
As I mentioned, there is unfortunately no data out there for this. There you might be able to find out existing libraries which have implemented that, so you can basically go through that, take inspiration from that, try it out on your own. But unfortunately, I haven't found it. If you find it, please share it with me.
Cool. Okay, next question from apps as well. Can you tell us about development using 2 different controllers, like split screen, like Street Fighter?
That's a good one. Because you can specify which controller you want to use, you can implement that. I have just one controller, so I could not do that. But the HID interface would basically give you an array of all the devices that is connected, and then you can filter out which devices you want to use, and then you can set up the logic in a way that, if a button is pressed on a device 1, the player 1 character would move. If a button is pressed on device 2, the player 2 character would move. So that is already possible, but I haven't got a chance to implement.
Okay, thanks. Next one from Yulia. What device would you like to connect next after trying this one?
So I have a remote controller for my presenter. So just before this talk, I was thinking maybe that is something that I want to try next. I still haven't got an idea of what I would do with that. But because I can connect Bluetooth devices as well with WebHID, that is the next device I want to try it.
Okay, cool. So, next question from Pedro. Do you believe that in the future we'll have a seamless controller integration? And how do you think this could be achieved?
That's a tough one. There are already companies out there who are using WebHID in production. If you go through those links, you will find that option out there. So we are moving towards that segment, but again, we need to first think about the security issues over there. Unless and until we have a solution for that, not every browser is going to support that, and you are going to have limitations with the number of users that you have. So I feel it's going in a positive direction because, again, talking about the accessibility, I'm really hoping we get this out sooner, we find a solution for that, but I don't have a definite answer for this.
No problem. Okay. Going back to that Bluetooth talk, some people have been asking about if you were able to connect this without the wire. So OLED asked you, did you research possibility to connect via Web Bluetooth API?
You can do that. I haven't got a chance to do that, but I feel like with the Web Bluetooth API, you would be limited with a lot of things because, again, the HID API allows you to send and receive the feedback. I don't know if you would be able to do that the same thing with the Bluetooth API. Also, I think the Bluetooth API is pretty standard in what kind of interactions you can do, but I might be wrong because I haven't played with that API yet.
Okay. So I have 2 questions from Maps. I'm going to try to merge them into one. So he asked if has tests been done using the DualSense Edge, and can we use the extra buttons? And also, can you connect to the integrated microphone and speaker of the controller?
You can. You can connect the integrated microphone and speaker of the controller. I think somewhere in the code I have a bit where I'm just muting the microphone because I'm basically not using that. That's why I did that. What was the first part of the question again?
Sorry, let's go. The first part of the question was, has been done tests using the DualSense Edge and about if we can use the extra buttons of the controller.
You can definitely use the extra buttons of the controller. I, again, have just a DualSense 5 controller with me, but I know examples out there which uses the switch controllers. There is a JavaScript library which you can use out of the box, which will help you implement this for a PS4 controller as well.
Awesome. Okay, that's a wrap of the questions, Harshil. If you guys have any other questions, please meet Harshil outside here. And now, thank you, man.
Thank you.